It is written in the oldest fragments of stone and whispered in the driest valleys that the most terrifying sound in the world is not a scream. It is not the roar of a beast, and it is not the crash of thunder against the mountain. The most terrifying sound is silence. It is the absolute, heavy, unnatural silence that falls over the deep woods at high noon, when the birds stop singing, and the wind dies in the grass, and the world holds its breath because something ancient has woken up. Tonight we descend into the quiet places. We will walk the forgotten goat paths with Pan, the god of the wild noon who gifted us the word panic. We will wander the frozen, gray stone garden of Medusa, not to fight her, but to sit with her in her eternal solitude. And we will lose our way in the deep, snow-covered woods with the Leshy, the guardian who mimics the trees and counts the falling leaves. These are not stories of heroes fighting in the sun. These are the stories of the things that wait in the dark. So, before the heavy water takes you, and before the drift of sleep pulls you under, like and subscribe to the archive, but only if you wish to return to this darkness. And tell me in the comments below, which of these quiet punishments do you fear the most? Is it the isolation, or the transformation, or the endless waiting? Now, let the surface fade. Let the noise of the modern world dissolve into mist. Close your eyes, breathe in, and breathe out. Let the weight of the day settle into the floor. There is no urgency here. There is no destination. There is only the forest and the heat and the waiting. We begin in the oldest place on earth. Before there were cities of marble, and before there were walls of stone, and before the poets wrote their verses, there was only the wild. The Greeks called it Arcadia. It was a place of rough mountains that scraped the sky, and deep valleys filled with shadow, and limestone caves that went down into the dark, wet earth. It was not a paradise of soft grass and easy living. It was a place of rocks and thorns and thick, tangled roots. It was a place where the sun was hot enough to crack the earth, and the shadows were cold enough to freeze the breath. And in this place, on a bed of pine needles, hidden away from the eyes of the world, the god Hermes left his son. He was not born like other gods. He was not born in light or in glory. When his mother, the nymph Dryope, first looked at him, she did not smile. She screamed. For the child was covered in rough, matted hair. His legs were not the smooth legs of a child, but the bent, powerful legs of a goat, ending in cloven hooves. And upon his wrinkled forehead sat two small horns. He was born laughing, a thick, guttural sound that echoed off the damp cavern walls. And his mother, terrified by this creature that was neither man nor beast, fled into the woods, leaving him alone on the cold stone floor. But Hermes, the god of travelers and thieves, looked down at the strange child and felt a sudden affection. He saw the strength in the goat legs, and he saw the cleverness in the eyes. And so he took the skin of a mountain hare, soft and warm, and he wrapped the boy in it to shield him from the cold wind of the peaks. He carried him up, past the clouds, past the eagles, to the heights of Mount Olympus, to show him to the kings and queens of the sky. And when he unrolled the hare skin, and the gods saw the goat child, they did not recoil in horror. They laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, perhaps, but it was the laugh of amusement. They were beautiful and perfect and golden, and he was shaggy and muddy and strange. They named him Pan, which means all, for he brought joy to all of them. But Pan, even as a child, understood that he did not belong in the marble halls. He did not belong on the smooth floors. He belonged in the dirt. He belonged where the roots grew deep and the water ran cold. He belonged where the air smelled of resin and decay. And so he left. He left the nectar and the ambrosia and the soft beds of the sky. He went back down the steep cliffs, down through the clouds, back to the rough hills of Arcadia. He chose the shadows over the light. He chose the silence over the music of Apollo. And as he walked, the moss seemed to grow over his footprints, and the vines curled around his horns, and he became the forest itself. He became the watcher in the woods, the spirit that dwells in the tangled thicket. Pan did not build a temple. He did not ask for worshippers to build him statues. He simply existed. He slept in caves during the cold nights, and he roamed the valleys during the hot days. But his favorite time, the time that belonged only to him, was the noon hour. The Greeks knew this time well. It was the time when the sun was at its highest point, beating down on the white rocks, bleaching the grass, and silencing the world. Have you ever walked in a forest at noon? It is different from the morning. In the morning, the birds call to one another, and the squirrels run, and the life of the wood is busy. But at noon, the heat presses down like a heavy blanket. The birds hide under the leaves. The wolves sleep in their dens. The wind stops completely. The air becomes thick and solid and hard to breathe. It is a time of suspension, as if time itself has stopped to rest. The ancient shepherds knew this silence. They called it the hour of Pan. They would not play their pipes during this time. They would not speak loudly. They would lie in the shade of the olive trees and cover their heads and wait. For they knew that Pan was sleeping, and they knew that if they woke him, if they broke the heavy, sacred silence of the noon, his anger would be terrible. It was not the anger of lightning, but the anger of the earth itself shaking you awake. This is where the word panic comes from. It does not come from a battle or a monster or a disaster. It comes from the sudden, irrational, overwhelming fear that strikes a traveler in a lonely place. You are walking through the woods. It is quiet, too quiet, and suddenly the hair on your arms stands up. Your heart begins to beat against your ribs, hard and fast and loud. You feel that something is behind you. You feel that the trees are watching you, that the rocks have eyes, that the shadows are reaching out. You feel an urge, a desperate, clawing urge to run without direction, to run until your lungs burn. That is the touch of Pan. It is the panikondema, the terror of Pan. It is not the fear of what you see. It is the fear of what you do not see. It is the fear of the presence that fills the empty space. And Pan, in his loneliness, loved to fill the empty spaces with his own heavy spirit. But Pan was not just a god of fear. He was a god of longing. He was a creature of the earth, heavy and physical, but his heart desired the ethereal, the light, and the beauty he saw in the nymphs. He fell in love again and again, and he was rejected again and again. The nymphs, the beautiful spirits of the water and the trees, saw his goat legs and his horns and his matted fur, and they ran. They ran just as his mother had run. He would chase them, not to harm them, but to be near them, to be understood. And the most famous of these was Syrinx. She was a nymph of the water, cold and clear and graceful. And Pan, clumsy and hot and smelling of the earth, saw her by the river Ladon. He wanted only to speak to her, to show her that beneath the fur and the horns there was a god who could love. But she saw only the beast. He followed her, he called out to her, but she did not stop. She ran to the river's edge, trapped between the god and the water. She prayed to her sisters, the river nymphs, to save her, to change her, to make her anything other than the object of his affection. And just as Pan reached out his hand, just as he closed his fingers around her arm to gently hold her, he did not feel skin. He felt the hollow, cool, smooth stalk of a reed. She was gone. He stood there, heavy and panting, holding nothing but a handful of river grass. The wind blew across the broken reeds, making a low, mournful, whistling sound. Two! Two! And Pan, listening to the voice of the woman he loved, now trapped in the wood, took a knife. He cut the reeds. He cut them into unequal lengths, long and short, deep and high. He bound them together with wax and string. He pressed them to his lips. and he blew. The sound that came out was not the sound of a god. It was the sound of the wind in the hollow places. It was the sound of a bird that has lost its mate. It was the sound of Arcadia itself weeping. He carried that instrument, the syrinx, with him for eternity. It was his only companion in the long, silent afternoons. It was the physical reminder of his rejection and his loss. And if you listen closely to the wind in the pines, you can still hear it. A lonely, drifting melody that has no beginning and no end. It is the music of the outcast. It is the music of the one who watches from the shadows, wishing to join the dance, but knowing that he never will. This was the tragedy of the wild god. He was the ruler of everything, yet he held nothing. He was the source of panic, yet he was the one who was afraid to be alone. He spent his immortality wandering the ridges, sleeping in the dirt, watching the seasons turn. And turn and turn. He is the patron saint of the lonely, of the misunderstood, of those who find comfort in the silence because the noise of the world is too much to bear. And as the sun sets over Arcadia, and the shadows stretch out like long fingers across the grass, Pan puts down his pipes. He closes his heavy, goat-like eyes, and he waits for the moon. For in the dark, even a monster looks like a man, and in the silence, we are all the same. But Syrinx was not the only voice in the woods. If you walk through the rocky canyons or stand at the edge of a steep cliff and you call out into the emptiness, something answers you. It is not a new voice. It is your own voice, returning to you, thinner and sadder and stripped of its strength. This is the nymph Echo. Like Pan, she is a creature of the lonely places, and like Pan, she was cursed by her own nature. She was once a nymph of great conversation, a woman who could weave words like a spider weaves silk. She would distract the goddess Hera with long, winding stories while Zeus pursued his secret loves. But the gods do not like to be distracted, and when Hera discovered the trick, she did not strike Echo with lightning. She struck her with silence. The curse was simple, and it was cruel. Echo could no longer speak the first word. She could only speak the last. She was stripped of her agency, stripped of her thoughts, and left only with the ability to repeat the sounds of others. She became a mirror of sound, a ghost of a voice. And it was in this state, broken and hollow, that she met Pan. Some stories say that Pan loved her. He saw in her a kindred spirit, a creature who was defined by what she had lost. He would play his pipes in the valleys, the sad, drifting notes of the syrinx, and she would repeat them back to him. The notes would bounce off the canyon walls, doubling the sorrow, doubling the loneliness. But other stories are darker. They say that Pan, in his arrogance and his frustration, grew jealous of her. He was the god of the wild sounds, the rustling leaves, the snapping twigs, the wind. But Echo had no body. She was everywhere and nowhere. She was a song without an instrument, and Pan, who was heavy and hairy and bound to the earth, could not possess her. He could not catch a voice. And in his madness, the panic that he controlled turned inward. He drove the shepherds of the hills into a frenzy, and like a pack of wolves, they tore the unseen nymph apart, scattering her pieces across the mountains. But you cannot kill a voice. Her limbs turned to stone, her blood turned to water. But her voice remained, hidden in the rocks, waiting forever to have the last word. The years turned into centuries, and Pan grew old, though gods do not age like men. His beard turned gray as the lichen on the rocks. His horns grew gnarled like the roots of an ancient oak, but his pride did not fade. He looked up at the mountain peaks where the sun god Apollo lived in eternal light, and he felt a challenge rising in his chest. It was the challenge of the earth against the sky, the challenge of the rough against the smooth. He challenged Apollo to a contest of music. He wanted to prove that the simple, breathy, hollow sound of the reeds was more beautiful than the calculated perfection of the golden lyre. It was a foolish challenge. But Pan was a god of the wild, and the wild is rarely wise. They met on the slopes of Mount Tmolus. Pan played first. He blew into his pipes, and the sound was the sound of the forest. It was the sound of the wind in the trees, the cry of the owl, the rustle of the grass. It was a barbaric, raw, and honest music. It was the music of the things that die. It was beautiful in its sorrow. And then Apollo played. He struck the strings of his lyre, and the sound was mathematical perfection. It was the sound of the planets moving in their orbits. It was the sound of pure light. It was cold, and it was flawless. The mountain god Tmolus, the judge, did not hesitate. He gave the victory to Apollo. For the gods prefer order over chaos. They prefer the sky over the dirt. But there was one man who disagreed. King Midas, a foolish king who loved the earth, said that he preferred the music of Pan. He preferred the song of the woods. Apollo, in his cold vanity, was offended. He said, "Must ears that hear so poorly have the shape of a man?" And he reached out, and he stretched the king's ears, pulling them long and gray and furry, until they were the ears of a donkey. It was a punishment for bad taste. It was a reminder that the wild has no place in the court of the high gods. Midas hid his shame, but the reeds, the children of Pan, knew the secret. And even today, when the wind blows through the river grass, the reeds whisper the king's secret to anyone who stops to listen. Midas has the ears of an ass. Midas has the ears of an ass. But all stories must end, even the stories of gods. The reign of the Olympians was long, but the world began to change. Cities grew. Forests were cut down to build fleets of ships. The silence of the noon was filled with the noise of hammers and wheels and armies. The panic of the woods began to fade as men mapped the dark corners of the world. And then, in the reign of the Emperor Tiberius, a ship was sailing from Greece to Italy. It was night. The sea was calm, strangely calm. The wind dropped completely, leaving the sails hanging like shrouds. The ship drifted near the dark, uninhabited island of Paxos. The passengers were awake, drinking wine and looking at the stars. Suddenly, a voice came from the island. It was not a human voice. It was louder than any man, deeper than the ocean, and it carried across the water without effort. It called out a name. Themis. Themis was the pilot of the ship, an Egyptian sailor. He did not answer. He was terrified. The voice called again. Themis. Still, he remained silent, clutching the tiller with white knuckles. The voice called a third time, echoing off the water with a terrible weight. Themis. This time the pilot gathered his courage. He leaned over the rail and shouted into the dark. "I am here. What do you want?" The voice from the island gave him a command. It was a strange command. It said, "When you reach the Pallades, proclaim to the world that the great Pan is dead. The great Pan is dead." The words settled over the ship like a heavy fog. Pan, the god of the wild, the god of the living wood, was dead. It was impossible. Gods do not die. They fade, they sleep, but they do not die. Yet the voice was absolute. Themis debated what to do, but when the ship drifted past the Pallades, the wind died again, and in the silence, he shouted out the message. He shouted to the empty shore, "The great Pan is dead." And before the echo of his voice had faded, a sound rose up from the land. It was not a shout, it was a groan. It was the sound of a million voices lamenting at once. It was the sound of the trees, and the rocks, and the rivers, crying out in a single, unified chorus of grief. It was the death knell of the ancient world. The magic was leaving, the mystery was leaving. The wild, chaotic, beautiful noon was ending, and the long, cold afternoon of history was beginning. Pan was the only Greek god to ever officially die, and with him died the terror of the woods. The silence remains, but it is empty now. The watcher is gone, and we are alone in the quiet places. When the great Pan died, the wild silence of the woods did not vanish. It simply moved. It drifted from the forests of Arcadia, and it settled on a lonely island called Sarpedon. But this silence is different. It is not the heat of the noon. It is the cold of the stone. It is not the silence of a held breath, but the silence of a stopped heart. If you walk through the high grass of this island, you will find a garden. It is the quietest garden in the world. There are no birds singing here, though there are birds made of stone perched on the branches. There are no soldiers marching, though there are men in armor standing in the weeds, their swords raised, their mouths open in a scream that makes no sound. They are waiting. They are waiting for the woman who lives in the center of the stillness. They are waiting for Medusa. Before she was a monster, and before she was a legend, she was a girl. She was born to the ancient sea gods, Phorcys and Ceto, creatures of the deep, dark, pressure-filled abyss. But unlike her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, Medusa was born with a fatal flaw. She was born mortal. Her sisters were timeless, carved from the bedrock of the ocean floor, immune to death and age. But Medusa was soft. She was made of skin and blood and breath. She was a fleeting thing in a family of eternities. And perhaps because she was mortal, she was beautiful. Her beauty was the beauty of a wave that is about to break, precious because it cannot last. It was a beauty that drew the eyes of men and the eyes of gods. But her greatest pride and her greatest vanity was her hair. It was not the snakes of the storybooks. It was a river of gold. It flowed down her back like a cascade of sunlight, thick and lustrous and heavy. Poets wrote verses about the way it caught the light. Men traveled from the mainland just to catch a glimpse of it as she walked to the market. She knew its power. She would spend hours brushing it, oiling it, weaving it into braids that looked like ropes of wheat. It was her crown. It was the symbol of her vitality. And in a world where she was the only one of her kin destined to die, her hair was her claim to immortality. It was the one thing about her that felt divine. But beauty is a burden in the ancient world. To protect herself, or perhaps to elevate herself, Medusa pledged her life to the goddess Athena. She became a priestess. She walked into the cold, white, marble temples of the virgin goddess. She took a vow of celibacy. She traded her freedom for the safety of the sanctuary. She spent her days sweeping the dust from the steps and lighting the oil lamps and pouring libations of wine. She hid her body beneath heavy robes. She lowered her eyes when men spoke to her. She tried to become stone long before the curse. She tried to become like Athena, perfect and cold and untouchable. But she could not hide the hair. Even bound beneath a veil, it shone like a beacon. The gods see everything, and Poseidon, the lord of the sea, the earth-shaker, saw her. He did not see a priestess. He did not see a servant of his rival, Athena. He saw a woman. He saw the golden hair that reminded him of the sun on the surface of the water. And Poseidon is not like the other gods. He is the ocean. He is vast and he is greedy, and he takes what he wants. He does not ask for permission. He does not understand the word no. He watched her from the waves. He watched her washing her robes by the shore. He watched the way the wind caught her veil, and a dark, heavy, crushing desire began to form in the depths of his mind. It was the desire of the storm for the shore. It was the desire to drown the land. One evening, as the storm clouds gathered over the Parthenon, Poseidon came to her. He did not come as a man. He came as a force of nature. He entered the sacred temple, the place where no man was allowed to tread. Medusa ran to the altar. She clung to the statue of the goddess, begging for protection. She invoked the sacred rites. She screamed the holy names. But the marble statue did not move. The stone eyes of Athena did not blink. The goddess was silent, and Poseidon, smelling the salt in the rain, dragged her from the altar. He took her on the cold floor of the sanctuary. It was not an act of love. It was an act of war. It was the sea crashing against the stone, violent and wet and inevitable. And when he was finished, He left her there, broken among the scattered offerings, a mortal wreckage in a house of immortals. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Medusa lay on the floor, shivering, waiting for comfort. She waited for Athena to descend, to wrap her in a cloak, to punish the god who had defiled her home. But gods do not punish each other. They do not fight their own kind for the sake of a mortal. Athena did descend, but she did not bring comfort. She brought rage. She looked at the woman lying on the floor, and she did not see a victim. She saw a stain. She saw a violation of her rules. She saw a woman who had seduced a god in her house. It was the cruel logic of the divine. Poseidon was too strong to punish. He was the ocean. You cannot punish the ocean for flooding a house, but you can blame the door for being open. "You were vain," the goddess whispered. Her voice was like the sound of a sword being drawn from a scabbard. "You were vain of your beauty. You were vain of your hair. You thought you could distract the god in my own temple." It was a lie, and they both knew it, but it was a necessary lie. It restored the order of the world. The victim had to be the villain, so the goddess could remain just. "Since you love your beauty so much," Athena said, "I will make it legendary. I will make it so that no man can ever look away from you again. I will make you a monument to your own sin." And she raised her hand, and the air in the temple turned to ice. The change began at the crown. The golden hair, the hair she had brushed for hours, the hair she had loved, began to move. It writhed like a living thing. The strands thickened. They grew heavy and cold and wet. The gold turned to a dark, bruised green. Scales pushed through the silk. The ends of the hair split open to reveal mouths and fangs and forked tongues. The gentle rustle of her hair against her back was replaced by a low, constant, venomous hiss, 100 voices whispering in her ear at once, 100 vipers born from her vanity. She reached up to tear them away, but they were part of her. They were her blood. They were her mind. And then the face changed. The soft, mortal skin that Poseidon had touched hardened. It turned gray and cracked and cold. Her lips, once red and inviting, pulled back to reveal the tusks of a boar. And her eyes, those beautiful, sad eyes, began to glow with a terrible, pale light. It was the light of the moon on a gravestone. It was the light of absolute stasis. She looked at her hands, and she saw claws. She looked at her reflection in the polished bronze shield of the temple, and she screamed. But the scream did not bring help. It brought isolation. Athena banished her. She cast her out of the temple, out of the city, out of the world of men. She sent her to the lonely island of Sarpedon, to live in the dark, to live in the silence, to live with the only things that would never leave her, the snakes that whispered her name, Medusa, Medusa, Medusa. She fled to the edge of the world. She fled to the island of Sarpedon, a place of gray rock and gray water and gray sky. She wanted to be alone. She wanted to hide her face from the sun and from the moon and from the eyes of the gods who had ruined her. But she quickly learned the true cruelty of her curse. It was not just that she was ugly, it was that she was deadly. The first time a bird flew down to look at her, a small, singing lark with feathers of brown and white, she looked up in surprise, and in the space of a heartbeat, the song stopped. The feathers hardened. The beak fused shut. The bird fell from the air like a stone dropped from a height. It hit the ground with a hollow clack. It did not bleed. It did not twitch. It was simply gone. And Medusa, weeping, picked up the heavy, cold stone that had been a life. And she realized that she could never look at a living thing again without destroying it. But the world would not leave her alone. Men are creatures of pride. And when they heard the stories of the monster on the island, they did not stay away. They came. They came in ships, and they came on rafts, and they came with swords of bronze and shields of iron. They came to kill the beast. They came to claim her head as a trophy for their kings. They did not know that she was afraid of them. They did not know that she hid in the deepest caves, pressing her face against the damp walls, covering her eyes with her hands, praying that they would leave. But they would not leave. They would hunt her. They would shout her name into the dark. Medusa! Come out, monster! And eventually, she would have to turn. She would have to defend herself. She would hear a footstep behind her, and she would spin around in fear, and her eyes would open wide, and the man would freeze. And so the garden grew. It was a garden of men. It was a museum of terror. Each statue was a moment of death, frozen in perfect, horrible detail. There was the soldier who had tried to strike her from behind, his arm raised forever in a blow that would never land. There was the boy, barely a man, who had come for glory, his face twisted in a permanent scream of regret. There was the captain who had tried to shield his eyes, his fingers turned to stone over his face. Medusa knew them all. She knew their names. She knew the way they had walked. She lived among them. She walked through the aisles of her own victims, touching their cold hands, whispering apologies to ears that could no longer hear. It was the quietest garden in the world, a crowd of hundreds, and not a single breath. The only sound on the island was the sound of the snakes. They never slept. Even when Medusa lay down on her bed of stone, exhausted by the weight of her own grief, the vipers were awake. They whispered to each other in a language of dry scales and forked tongues. They tasted the air. They watched the shadows. They were her guardians, and they were her jailers. They were the children of the curse, and they loved her in their own cold, reptilian way. They would soothe her nightmares with their hypnotic weaving. Sleep, sleep. But they were also a constant reminder of what she had become. She could never rest her head without hearing the hiss of the goddess's anger. She could never brush her hair. She could never feel the wind on her neck. She was trapped in a cage of living venom. And then the end came. It did not come with an army. It came with a single man, Perseus. He was not like the others. He did not come for glory alone. He came because the gods sent him. He was the weapon of Athena. The goddess had not forgotten her grudge. She had waited for the right moment, the right hero, the right executioner. She gave him a shield polished like a mirror. Hermes gave him winged sandals to walk on the air. Hades gave him a helmet of darkness to make him invisible. It was not a fair fight. It was not a duel. It was an assassination. The entire pantheon of Olympus had conspired to kill one lonely woman on a rock. They armed him with magic, and they pointed him toward the silence. He came while she slept. It was the only way. He flew over the garden of statues, his winged sandals making no sound on the stones. He entered the cave where she lay. He did not look at her. He knew the stories. He knew that even in sleep, her face carried the power of the abyss. He looked only at his shield. He watched her reflection in the bronze, a distorted, curved, gray image of a woman curled in the darkness. He saw the snakes resting on her pillow. He saw the sadness in the curve of her back. He saw that she was not a monster, but a prisoner. But a hero does not feel pity. A hero does what he is told. He raised his sword, the sickle blade of adamant, sharp enough to cut the wind. He struck. One blow, clean and hard and final. There was no scream. There was no struggle. The snakes hissed in a sudden, violent chorus of alarm, and then they were silent. The head, the beautiful, terrible head, rolled across the stone floor. And for the first time in years, Medusa was still. The curse was broken, the eyes glaze over, the venom dried. The tension that had held her body for so long, the constant fear, the constant vigilance, simply evaporated. It was not a death, it was a release. It was the end of the long, cold afternoon. The victim in the garden was finally allowed to sleep without dreaming. But death is not always an end. Sometimes it is a door, for Medusa was not empty. For all those years inside her, trapped by the curse, were the children of Poseidon, the children of that stormy night in the temple. They had been waiting, growing, hidden beneath the monster's skin, and now, as the blood touched the earth, they were free. From her neck sprang two magnificent beings, Chrysaor, the warrior with the golden sword, and Pegasus, the winged horse, white as the foam of the sea, and beautiful as a dream. They rose from the corpse of their mother, shaking the blood from their wings, crying out to the sky. They were the beauty she had lost. They were the proof that she had once been something other than a beast. The sound of their birth woke the sisters. Stheno and Uriel, the immortal Gorgons, rose from their sleep in the back of the cave. They saw the body of their mortal sister. They saw the blood, and they began to scream. It was a sound that had never been heard in the world before. It was a high, thin, piercing wail of pure grief. It rose and fell like the wind in a canyon. It was the sound of immortal love mourning a mortal loss. It was so terrible and so beautiful that the goddess Athena, watching from the clouds, was struck by it. She heard the Gorgons lament, and later she would invent the flute, the double aulos, to mimic that sound. The music of the flute is the sound of Medusa's sisters crying for her death. Perseus took the head. He put it in a sack, and he flew away on his winged sandals, leaving the body and the weeping sisters behind. He used the head to save a princess and to kill a king and to turn his enemies to stone. But in the end, he gave it to Athena, and the goddess, with a cold, final irony, attached the head of Medusa to her shield, the Aegis. The woman who had been raped in Athena's temple and cursed by Athena's jealousy was now Athena's weapon. She was bound to the goddess forever, a symbol of terror, a guardian of the divine. But if you look closely at the shield, at the face of the monster, you do not see rage. You see a tired woman, her eyes closed, her mouth relaxed, finally safe in the silence of the metal. The garden is empty now. The statues have crumbled to dust, but the face remains, watching, waiting, and sleeping. We leave the stone garden behind. We leave the tragedy of the Greek islands, where the sun is hot, and the gods are cruel, and the heroes are vain. We travel north. We travel to a place where the gods are not golden statues living in the clouds, but are made of bark and sap and shadow. We travel to the vast, endless, suffocating forests of the Slavic lands. Here, the silence is different. It is not the silence of the dead. It is the silence of the watching. It is the silence of the deep taiga, where the trees stretch on for 1,000 miles without a break, and the snow swallows the sound of your footsteps, and the moss covers the path before you have even finished walking it. In this place there is a guardian. He has no temple. He has no worshippers. He has no name, only a title. He is the Leshy, and he is the forest itself. The Leshy is not a spirit in the way we understand spirits. He is not a ghost. He is physical. He is heavy. He smells of resin and wet earth and rotting leaves. He is the lord of the forest, the master of the green noise, the whispering sound of 1,000,000 leaves moving in the wind. To look at him is to look at a walking tree. His skin is as rough and furrowed as the bark of an ancient oak. His blood is not red iron, but blue sap, cool and sticky like the blood of a pine. His hair is a tangled mass of root and vine, filled with pine cones and nesting beetles and the dust of the woods. He does not wear clothes of silk or wool. He wears the forest. He is wrapped in the skins of wolves, or the pelts of bears, or simply the moss that grows on the north side of the stones. But the most terrifying thing about the Leshy is not his appearance, it is his logic. He does not follow the rules of men. He follows the rules of the woods. And in the woods, size is a relative thing. When the Leshy walks in the tall forest, among the ancient pines that scrape the sky, he is a giant. His head brushes the clouds. He steps over rivers as if they were puddles. He shakes the mountains with his laughter. But when he walks in the open meadows or hides behind a blade of grass, he becomes small. He shrinks. He becomes no taller than the stem of a wildflower. He is a creature of context. He is exactly as big or as small as the forest needs him to be. He has no true form. He is simply a reflection of his surroundings, a mirror made of wood. Sometimes he tries to look like a man. He will appear to a traveler on the road wearing the clothes of a peasant or a merchant or a friend. But if you look closely, if you look past the glamour, you will see the wrongness. You will see that he has no eyebrows and no eyelashes, for the forest does not need to blink. You will see that his eyes burn with a pale, green, phosphorescent fire. You will see that he casts no shadow, even when the sun is bright, and you will see his clothes. The Leshy does not understand the purpose of buttons or shoes. He wears his caftan buttoned the wrong way, left over right. He wears his shoes on the wrong feet. He mimics humanity, but it is a hollow mimicry. It is like a wolf trying to wear a suit. It is a disguise that barely covers the wildness underneath. He is the shepherd of the wild. Just as a human shepherd guards his sheep, the Leshy guards the bears and the wolves and the hares. They are his cattle. He knows every den and every burrow and every nest. When the forest fires burn, he carries the animals to safety in his massive arms. When the winter is too cold, he wakes the bears to tell them to turn over in their sleep. But he is a jealous shepherd. He does not like intruders. If a hunter enters his woods and takes more than he needs or breaks the branches without purpose, the Leshy wakes up. He does not attack with a sword. He attacks with confusion. He attacks with the path itself. The Slavic peasants called it blood, the wandering, the getting lost. It is the Leshy's favorite game. You are walking on a path you have known since you were a child. You know every tree. You know every rock. But suddenly, the light changes. The shadows stretch. You step over a fallen log, and when you look up, the path is gone. The trees have moved. The sun is setting in the north instead of the west. You turn around to go back, but the way back is now a swamp. You are not just lost in space, you are lost in the Leshy's mind. He has turned the forest around you like a Rubik's Cube, and somewhere in the rustling of the leaves you hear it. A sound that is half laugh, half wind. Clap, clap, clap. The Leshy clapping his wooden hands in delight. There is only one way to escape the maze. You cannot use a compass. You cannot use the sun. You must use the Leshy's logic. You must become wrong like him. If you realize you are being led astray, you must stop immediately. You must take off your clothes. You must turn your coat inside out, so the lining shows. You must put your left boot on your right foot, and your right boot on your left foot. You must disrupt your own humanity. You must become a mirror of the chaos. By turning your world upside down, you break the Leshy's spell. He sees you not as a man, but as a reflection of himself. And in that moment of confusion, the path will reappear, the trees will settle, and you can run. But the Leshy is not just a trickster, he is a gambler. The legends say that the Leshies of different forests, the Leshy of the north and the Leshy of the south, meet once a year to play cards. But they do not play for money. They play for lives. They bet the squirrels, they bet the hares, they bet the deer. And when one Leshy loses, he must pay his debt. This is how the peasants explain the great migrations. When you see thousands of squirrels rushing through the forest, moving from one region to another, drowning in rivers, ignoring the hunters, running as if possessed, it is not biology. It is a debt being paid. It is the Leshy of the north driving his cattle to the winter. It is a cold, vast, economic exchange of life. Sometimes he gets lonely. The silence of the trees is not enough. He wants a voice that is not the wind. And so, he takes people. He does not kill them. He takes them to his home, a wooden hut that has no door and no windows, hidden in the deepest part of the swamp. He takes young women or unbaptized children, or those cursed by their mothers in anger. If a mother says to her child, The forest take you. The Leshy hears it as a permission slip. He takes the child, and they live with him. They forget their language, they forget their names. They become wild things, running on all fours, covered in moss, eating bark and berries. They become part of his collection, a pet human, a curiosity to be kept on a shelf of wood. Yet, men still tried to bargain with him. The shepherds knew that the wolf was strong, but the Leshy was stronger. So they made pacts, they signed the Kolabar. A shepherd would go into the woods at twilight. He would take the cross from around his neck and put it in his boot. He would renounce the church and the sun, and he would leave an offering, bread, salt, or sometimes a single cow. In exchange, the Leshy would become the protector of the herd. No wolf would dare to touch the sheep. No cow would wander off a cliff. The Leshy would serve the man, but at a terrible price. For once you sign a pact with the woods, you belong to the woods. And when the shepherd died, his body would not rot. He would simply disappear. He would become another shadow in the tree line, another voice in the green noise, waiting for the next traveler to lose their way. But even guardians must sleep. The Leshy is bound to the cycle of the seasons. He is not a god of the eternal sky like Apollo. He is a god of the changing earth. And as the autumn turns to winter, as the leaves fall and rot, and the frost begins to bite the roots, the Leshy changes. He grows restless. The peasants knew the date well, October 17th, the feast of Saint Erofei. On this day, the Leshy goes mad. He knows the long sleep is coming. He knows the ice is closing in, and he rages against the dying of the light. He tears up the trees by their roots. He chases the animals into their holes. He screams with the voice of the blizzard. It is not anger. It is the panic of a creature that is about to lose its world to the white silence of the snow. And then silence. The rage breaks. The wind dies. The first heavy snow falls, covering the broken branches, covering the torn earth, covering the tracks of the wolf. The Leshy falls into the earth. He shrinks. He becomes small, smaller than a mouse, smaller than a seed. He burrows deep into the frozen ground. He curls up beneath the roots of the oldest oak tree, and he sleeps. For the entire winter, while the world above is locked in ice, the guardian of the forest is dreaming. He dreams of the green noise. He dreams of the sap rising. He dreams of the sun waking him up in the spring. But for now, he is part of the soil. He is the heartbeat under the snow, but the spring does not always bring him back. In the modern world, the forests are shrinking. The green noise is being drowned out by the noise of engines and saws and cities. The Leshy is fading. Just as Pan died when the world stopped believing in the wild, the Leshy is disappearing as the world stops respecting the woods. He is becoming a ghost in his own home. He retreats deeper and deeper into the taiga, into the places where no road goes, into the swamps where no map is drawn. He is lonely. He has no one to trick. He has no one to gamble with. He has no one to protect. The packs are broken, the shepherds are gone, and the forest is forgetting its master. Yet, if you go there, if you go to the deep woods, and you sit very still, you might still feel him. You might feel the sudden, irrational feeling that you are being watched. You might hear a branch snap when there is no wind. You might find that your path has shifted just a few inches to the left. Do not be afraid. It is only the old man. It is only the memory of the wild. He is checking on you. He is checking to see if you have turned your coat inside out. He is checking to see if you respect the silence. And if you leave him an offering, a piece of bread, or a drop of water, he will let you pass. He will let you walk through his dying kingdom, and he will whisper to the trees to lift their branches for you. And so the guardian becomes the guarded. The master becomes the memory. The Leshy dissolves back into the bark and the moss. He is not gone, but he is everywhere. He is the damp smell of the earth after rain. He is the shadow that moves in the corner of your eye. He is the feeling of peace that settles over you when you walk alone among the pines. He is the quiet place inside the noise, and as we leave the forest, as we step off the path, we leave him to his rest. We leave Pan to his noon, and Medusa to her stone, and the Leshy to his winter sleep. The stories are done, the characters are tired, the book is closing, and now the forest is gone, the stone is gone, the island is gone, there is only the heavy, soft, gray mist. The air is cool here, the air is still. You can feel the weight of the stories lifting off your shoulders. You can feel the weight of the day lifting off your chest. There is no more need to listen. There is no more need to think. There is only the feeling of sinking down into the soft, warm, dark earth. The body is heavy, the legs are heavy, the arms are heavy, the eyes are so very tired. You are like the stone in the garden. You are still, you are solid, you are at peace. The moss grows over the thoughts, the vines grow over the worries. It is quiet here, it is safe here. No one is watching, no one is waiting. You are simply existing in the dark, breathing in and breathing out, slow, deep, rhythmic, like the tide of a dark ocean, like the wind in a distant valley. The mind is drifting, the mind is floating, the mind is letting go of the words, letting go of the names, letting go of the shapes. It is the hour of Pan now, the noon of the night. The silence is absolute. It wraps around you like a heavy blanket. It protects you. It holds you. You are drifting in the space between the stars. You are drifting in the space between the thoughts. There is nothing to do. There is nowhere to go. There is only this moment, this heavy, silent, eternal moment. The eyelids are too heavy to open. The body is too heavy to move. You are sinking deeper and deeper and deeper into the warm, soft, velvet dark. Sleep is coming. It comes like a fog from the ocean. It comes like the snow in the forest. It covers everything. It quiets everything. The green noise is a whisper now. The snake's hiss is a lullaby. The panic is gone. The fear is gone. There is only the rest. The deep, ancient, healing rest. You are safe in the archive. You are safe in the quiet places. Let the water take you. Let the earth hold you. Let the dark keep you. And as the final leaf falls, and as the final stone settles, the world stops turning. The breath is slow. The heart is slow. The mind is empty. You are asleep. You are asleep. You are asleep. And so the tale is told, and the forest is still, and we rest.